be as familiar. I mean, people, I think, here are generally sympathetic with the Palestinian cause, but what is it that you want people to really understand?
Well, if there would be a handful of things, I would say, first of all, to realize that here in the United States, we all receive an education. The education system here in the United States is heavily, heavily influenced by an ideology that supports Israel. That ideology is called Zionism. And what does that mean? That means that if you walk down the street and say Palestine, most of the time people will confuse it with Pakistan because they've never heard of Palestine. You ask the same people and you mention Israel, they go, "Oh, of course, Israel. We love Israel." Yes, of course. Because in school we learn, America, I didn't go to school here, but in school, everybody learns about Israel. They learn about the Bible, biblical stories as though they were history. They learn about the Holocaust. They learn about the creation of the state of Israel as though it was some wonderful thing, and so on and so forth. So that is base camp in America. That's where everybody starts. So of course Americans support Israel. That's what they know. That's what they've been taught. So the most important thing is to unlearn that and to realize that Israel is an implant. Israel is a name that was given to a racist, genocidal regime that was established by settlers who came from other countries and stole Palestine. That's what Israel is. There's no beautiful, wonderful, biblical, spiritual, none of that is true. It's a brutal, racist regime that Amnesty International designated in a report as apartheid, which is a crime against humanity. And I recommend that people read the report, or at least read the synopsis of the report on the Amnesty International website. And they demonstrate how from the moment this state of Israel was established, the crime of apartheid has been committed against the Palestinian people in many different ways. And they touch on all the different aspects of apartheid. So that is really important because that's ground zero. That's where you can start to understand what is happening today. Unless you have an understanding of how this whole thing began, unless there's an understanding of what this thing called Israel really is, then it's impossible to understand. And then when people say, "Oh, it's complicated," you look at it and you say, "Oh, it's got to be complicated." It's not complicated. It's like you were saying. They didn't invent anything. They didn't invent anything. They improved the apartheid, so it's much more fierce than it was in South Africa. They improved the oppression, so it's much more fierce than other cases and other examples in history where the native people of a land were oppressed and killed. They've brought the level of the genocide to a point where they can commit genocide and claim that it's self-defense. They can commit the destruction of a people who have never had an army. Palestinians have never had an army. There's never been a Palestinian tank, ever, or warplane, or even any kind of regular army, ever. And somehow, the perpetrators of a genocide, and I'm not only talking about the last year in Gaza, I'm talking about a genocide that's been going on since this establishment of this state called Israel. Since the very beginning, it was a genocide. And the whole time, they managed to convince people around the world that it's an act of self-defense. Of people that have never had an army, of people that have been oppressed, of people that have never, as much as, like I said, had a military force. And nobody's asking, wait a minute, what do you mean self-defense? Self-defense is what? That's incredibly important for people to understand because, again, that's ground zero. If you understand that, then you can understand what's happening today. And then you have to ask yourself a question, why are we paying for this? Why are we allowing billions and billions of dollars to go there and continue this thing? Why? Why do we have a president and other members of, people of high power who claim that they are Zionists? To say I'm a Zionist is like to say I'm a white supremacist, I'm a Nazi, I'm a fascist. It's the same. Yet, when it comes to this, they get a pass.
So I want to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned. You mentioned South Africa, and for those of you that are a little bit younger, I remember the access of apartheid between South Africa, Israel, and the United States. And if you want to kind of learn about, the resistance against apartheid South Africa, it would really be important for you to use that as a case study that will help you understand what's happening in Palestine. I'm just going to mention two people because I have such admiration for them. They've since passed, Dick Gregory and Randall Robinson. Every day they would go in front of the South African embassy, which now has Mandela in front of it, and every day they would get arrested. They were the only two people, and they kept coming back. And so when people talk about the movements against apartheid, there was, here it was like, yeah, the ANC are terrorists. It's the same language. But I would like to slightly differ in one thing that you said. Genocide is genocide. And I think in the United States of America, the indigenous people, okay, as well as the African diaspora, have been suffering from a long genocide. And, there are different ways of killing, right? You can kill people when they're dead quickly, or you can kill them more slowly so that their rates of various diseases are higher. But the main thing which is different here in the African diaspora is really killing hope. And I'm going to give you a specific example of that. When this woman, she was an art therapist, she did a study comparing Palestinian children and African American children in Chicago, in Cabrini Green, and looked at their artwork. The artwork of Palestinian kids, I should say African American kids, was so disturbing. Why? Because they are enmeshed, right, in a system where the community has been deliberately dismantled. And so you turn around, you don't know which way the enemy is coming from, if you will. Whereas in Palestine, because there wasn't the kidnapping of Palestinians, yes, of course, it's awful, but at least the community is intact and there's sort of a common enemy. So I would really urge people, if you don't know about the history of Washington, D.C., it's really a case study that is going to make it easier for you to understand what's happening in Palestine. I'll just make a couple of points and then I'd like to talk a little bit more about your first book. So when I first came to Washington, D.C. back in 1985, it was called Chocolate City because 85% of the residents were African American. Now I believe it's 43%. So DC and how it was created actually was going to be a port city, and Northern Virginia was part of it. But the white plantation owners really didn't like that, so they stole this part. And it is, I know that colonial settlers are going to Southeast just by driving. So the first thing that starts to happen, speaking of nice lawns and everything, the rackety, broken down bridges and highways start to get, fixed. Berry Farm is a great example of what happened to the people there. They built this amazing rec center, and the people said, okay, that means that we're going to be displaced. And they were. So the displacement is happening, it's more sanitized, it's gentrification, but the parallels, it's important to look at what the parallels, because the same system underlies the subjugation, the breaking down of people of color. And I think there is that other element, which is racism, right? So the other thing, I was just talking to, I think, my niece on the way here. They should do a study called, and they have done a study, Walking While Black. Because now you see young white kids in Southeast, they walk as though they own it, right? You don't look across the street. I call them Israeli settlers, right? There's actually a study that shows when you are black or brown and you walk as a pedestrian, you are more likely to get killed. White kids, and you can see this, get people stop for them. So it might feel like I'm digressing a little bit, but it's the same illness, it's the same subjugation, it's the same colonization. And underneath that, of course, is protecting our interests, right? And what are our interests? That 40% of people in the DMV are food insecure, that the number one cause of debt is medical debt. So I went kind of on a tangent, but I think it's important to bring and link these issues together. So I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the general sun, and then we're going to talk, if you don't mind, kind of segueing into the other book that you have written. I'm sorry.
So basically, the book starts, and the general son. I'll give you a little background. Around 2000, let's say 8, 9. I was already involved in this enough that people would ask me to sit on panels and give lectures and stuff like that. And so I've been doing that for several years, and then a friend of mine came up to me and said, you write a book. Now, when it's your story, you think, what's it to write about? It's not that interesting because it's, your family, your people. So anyway, she convinced me, and then I started writing, and eventually in 2012 the book came out. And so the book starts with me, the first things I saw as a child, and my first impressions of my family and Zionism and the state of Israel. So, it's like in the eyes of a child looking up at all these grown-ups that have really important positions and have done really incredible things and has heard all these stories about, the miracle of the establishment of the Jewish state and all these Arabs that try to kill us and all the, and so on and so on and so on, and how we miraculously succeeded and all these great people that were around me. Because around me, all my family were involved, very heavily involved and held important positions. And so that's, I was really proud. And that's how the book begins, me describing all that from that point of view. So for me, it's really, I can't read the book right now anymore because that beginning, I just can't take it. And many Palestinian friends of mine who read the book, also the first half of the book was just torture for them because of that. And then gradually my journey begins, and then I start to describe the journey maybe halfway through the book. And the journey deepens and deepens and deepens, and as the more I get into the journey, and the journey is into Palestine. Now, much of it happened outside of Palestine, because my journey began here in the United States. First time I met with Palestinians and talked to Palestinians was in the United States, not in Jerusalem, where I was born and raised. And then eventually I reached my journey leads me, like I said, to this intersection where I have to pick my loyalties. And then I reach the political conclusions that I reach, and these are the political conclusions that I talk about, which is basically that this whole idea of the state of Israel is flawed. It has no legitimacy and needs to be, as a political entity, eliminated. Now, when you say that, everybody goes, what? You want to kill all the Jews? That's the first response, which of course, unless you come from that mindset, that wouldn't occur to you. But when you're within that mindset, and people say this, people are afraid to say what I just said, because they will be, labeled as anti-Semitic. But the idea is that you have to dismantle the structure of apartheid. You have to dismantle this apartheid regime and allow for a free, democratic Palestine on all of historic Palestine to be established instead, so that people can live with equal rights in a real democratic state. The Palestinians can be free, and the Palestinians can be safe, and the Palestinians' rights and security can be guaranteed. There is no other way. There is no other way to bring about an end, a peaceful end to this tragedy of Palestine. There isn't. You have to get rid of the source. It doesn't matter what aspect of the Palestinian tragedy you point to. you can't fix one without removing the root cause. Right? You don't have to be a genius to figure that out. It took me a long time, but you don't have to, some people it takes much faster than that. You have to eliminate the root, and the root is this regime, this racist regime called Israel. So you eliminate that, you dismantle that, and then you allow the creation of real democracy with equal right. You free Palestinians from this, you liberate Palestine, you liberate Palestinians, and that is the only way that you can have Palestinians and this new creation called Israelis, which is really a new thing. It's like the whites in South Africa. They're not organically from there, but they've been there a long time, so they're part of the landscape, right? But it's the same thing. And then people can live in peace. Then you can have, a normal life, a normalcy. So at the end of the book, that's basically the conclusion that I reach. But it's a personal story, so it's a memoir. So I go through it, relaying all the different experiences that I've had. The first time I drove into Palestinian towns, I thought I was going to get killed. Everybody was an Arab. Palestinians are Arab. They speak Arabic. I didn't. I do now. I didn't. It was frightening, and I didn't even know that I was afraid of things like. I didn't think I would be afraid. But then once I was in it, of course, I got lost. All that kind of stuff. These experiences, and suddenly all these demons that you didn't know exist just flood your mind. And so anyway, that's really the general sum. And I'll segue to the next book. After I finished it, the book came out in 2012. I started, traveling and speaking about it. And I was at the University of Texas in Dallas, where I heard this unbelievable story. And it was only unbelievable to me because of my being a privileged white male. I think if I was anything else, then the story that I heard, and which I ended up writing about, the second book, Injustice, would not have shocked me. But because of there's such a huge gap between being white privileged and everything else in this country, that I was really shocked by the story, and I felt that I had to write it. I'm glad I did.
So tell us about this story and how you came to get to know the 5 people that you profiled.
So the book is called Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. The Holy Land Foundation was the largest Muslim relief organization in America. It was run by Palestinians and by religious, as many relief organizations are, run by deeply religious Muslim Palestinian Americans. And you travel around the country, you talk to young Muslims everywhere. Everybody knew about the Holy Land Foundation because it was trustworthy, and it had a great reputation. It did great work. 90% or 92% of the funds raised would go to the causes, which is unheard of in relief organizations. So that's incredible. And then after 9/11, actually before 9/11, throughout the 1990s, because this organization was so successful, different agents of the Zionist organizations in this country began to criticize them, began to spread rumors about them, that they were supporting terrorism. Groups like, have you ever heard of the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which is a horrible racist organization that pretends to be a civil rights organization. And Zionist politicians began writing articles, approaching the IRS to try to revoke their nonprofit status, and really went to the FBI. The FBI began tapping their phones. And then 9/11 came, and there was a need to do something. The administration felt they had to, you got to kill somebody, you got to arrest somebody, you got to stop somebody. So there was literally an order given to, just round up the usual suspects, find somebody to arrest. And 9/11, that was September. By December the 4th, the president needed something to announce. So, let's see, a relief organization run by Muslim Palestinians that's sending money to help Palestinians. Perfect, right? So they decided to claim that this organization was sending money to Hamas, which was by then was designated a terrorist organization. It was during the Clinton administration that Hamas was designated a terrorist organization. Now they did no such thing. They had no connection to Hamas. They had no connection to any political or military organization at all. They were dedicated to relief. But why confuse a good story with the facts? So their funds were seized, and they were designated as a terrorist organization. Now, to be designated, there's no burden of proof. Somebody needs to say that you're a terrorist or that your organization is a terrorist organization. It's very easy to be designated. And so they were designated, and then they thought, well, America's under stress, Americans are afraid, we can fix this. So they went to court, and they sued the government, demanding that they remove the designation and unfreeze their assets. There was a lot of money that they were raising. So they went to court, and they lost.
Wow.
And the lawyers that represented them were stellar lawyers. And they couldn't understand. They just couldn't understand. So then they went to appeal, and they lost the appeal. And it just seemed like they were hitting walls everywhere they went. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. Now, the body of evidence that the government had was zero. The body of evidence that they had showing that everything they did that they've done over the years was huge. Nobody cared. Then the lawyers heard that there were indictments coming down, criminal indictments, and they thought that there's no crime. What's the crime? Because there's obviously no proof that they did anything. So by then the government changed the story. They said, well, they didn't give money directly to Hamas. They were working with organizations in Palestine, charity organizations, that were run by Hamas. How did they know? Where did that come from? It didn't matter. In the northern district of Texas, none of that mattered. These were Muslims, they're Arabs, their wives are covered. That's a good enough reason. And so then I show up in Texas, and after I give this talk about my book, the daughters of some of these guys who had by then gone through a trial and been put in jail. So there were two trials. The first trial was a mistrial. The second trial, they were all convicted. Sentences were from 15 to 65 years. Two of them got 65 years. One of them got 20 years, and two of them got 15 years in federal prison. So I show up to this talk, and these students who were student activists, and a couple of them everybody knew about them, but a couple of them were actually daughters of two of these guys. And they tell me the story. And there's this assumption, I go back to the privilege, there's this assumption that exists within privileged people in this country that the justice system works. And it's only because I did this, worked on the story, that eventually I realized that that's the case. Otherwise, I don't think I would have had that realization. So I got into it, and I went back to Texas, and I met the families, and I started visiting these guys in prison. And let me tell you, if you've ever visited anybody in federal prison, it is really scary. It's horrifying, especially the maximum security prisons. And then, and that's it. I mean, that's it. The gist of the book that's the gist of the book. It's the story of these five men, their backgrounds. The story I read about 20,000 pages of court documents to write this. And actually, I would have put all of them in the book, just so people can have an idea what an absurd reality exists in the courts. I cannot believe the miscarriage of justice that takes place in the court. Now, again, if you come from a reality where that is the norm, that's different. When you come from a reality that you expect justice, then it's shocking. And that's it. So two of them, well, I'll talk about what happens today a little bit later on, but that's basically the story of the book. Yeah.
Well, for those of us that, either have some melanin in our skin or, are aware of sort of the African diaspora, I mean, Marcel think that's his maiden name, right? Was just executed a couple of days ago.
So Marcellus.
Thank you, Marcellus, that the jury said there is no proof, and he was executed. So that is justice, right?
You know, we had his poem you read here this weekend
For God
about
Almighty.
Palestine. You wrote about Palestine.
Is that right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've written a
We'll-
poem.
I will email it to you.
Yes, please, please do.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, yeah. So that's why I think it's important to look at the parallels, because it's one rotten system, and it's amazing how not creative they are actually. It's the same script. But the sad thing is that people, don't figure that out, but I'm glad that you did. Do you have your book with you? Because
And we have it.
They have it here.
I'd like for you to read
Can you get
the
it?
beginning
Okay.
passage, because,
We get the.
thank you, it's here, thank you.
Okay.
Can you read? I thought you were gonna read.
Yes, no, I'd like for you to read.
All right, well, I'll read a couple of passages here. So I began, my relationship with the five began when I started communicating with them by email from prison. I mean, that's really when we, And the first one I connected with, his name is Shukri Abu Bakr. Shukri Abu Bakr he was the general director of the Holy Land Foundation. And he was, of course, a Palestinian. And he's one of the two that received 65 years. So he's in a maximum security federal prison in Beaumont, Port Arthur, in Texas. And let me tell you something. It's not a place you want to visit. But he and I began corresponding by email. And, I'm free. He's in jail. And he is encouraging me. And he is keeping my hope alive. Unbelievable. And I dedicate the book to the memory of his daughter, Sanabel. And I wrote, whose enthusiasm and love of life inspired so many. She was very, very sick. She had several diseases, and eventually, sadly, she passed away. Now, there's a story that two daughters of two of these guys told me about the day that they were arrested. Now, the FBI came to all of their homes at the same time, early in the morning, guns blazing, 20, 30 armed guys, agents, just, barging into their homes, kids waking up, it's, early in the morning, everybody's in their pajamas, what the hell's going on? And the two of the older girls of two of these guys, they were friends, and one wrote to the other, and I describe it here, 20-year-old Zaira Abu Bakr, she's Shukri's daughter, was still in bed in her parents' home when she heard the banging on the front door. She looked at her phone and noticed several missed calls and a message from her friend Noor. Noor was the daughter of Hassan, who also got 65 years. She opened the message from Noor and it contained one word, Aju. Aju in Arabic means they came. There's a culmination of many, many years of persecution. And they were old enough to realize that this was coming, and that was the moment. And all she had to do was say that one word. And they both knew exactly what it meant. That moment that they'd been fearing for so many years had come. And then I go on, I said at precisely 7 a.m. Central Time on July 27, 2004, the homes of Shukri Abu Bakr, Hassan Ilashi, Mufid Abdul Qadir, Abdurrahman Odeh, and Muhammad al-Zain were raided by local and federal law enforcement. All five men, who would come to be known as the HLF 5, Holy Land Foundation 5, were taken into custody. 4 years and 2 trials later, all 5 were sent to federal prison, serving sentences from 15 to 65 years. I learned about the HLF 5 in the fall of 2011. And then I want to read to you from from the first email I got from Shukri. So it was interesting to write. It was interesting. It took a long time to write the book because I was writing about 5 different people, 5 different stories, and then the story of the organization itself, and then some background because they were accused of sending money to Hamas, and most people don't know what Hamas is. So I have a chapter here explaining what Hamas is and what it's about. So I talk about Shukri, the correspondence with Shukri, and I said his letters were remarkably optimistic considering the indignities he has undergone. He speaks of his family with love, pride, and joy, and all his trials with forbearance. And all 5 of them, like I said, were devoutly religious Muslims, and that's, without any question, the source of their strength.
Please tell us about Sanabit, the daughter.
Yeah, I will. I'll read the email from her in just a bit. Yeah. So this is an email from Shukri. This is one of the first emails I got from him. He goes, we're out of lockdown this morning, so there was a lot. They go. I think Beaumont Port Arthur, I heard was either the one of the top. In other words, the highest murder rates within a prison. It's one of the top ones, Beaumont Port Arthur, and that's where they put this guy. We're out of lockdown this morning. I took advantage of my solitude to finish up some important readings that included revising my memorization of the Quran and an introduction to neuro-linguistic programming. The first book I read in my first month of incarceration, I was put in solitary for the first 3 months, was Man's Search for Meaning by Dr. Viktor Frankl. He illuminated.
While was quote, and just really quickly to interject, he was the one that said, and paraphrasing, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal.
And he was referring to the Holocaust. He was writing about the Holocaust. He goes, he illuminated his secret to Holocaust survival, how to turn one's predicament into human achievement, and how man's main concern is not to gain pleasure or to avoid pain, but to see meaning in his life. In his treasured book, he taught me that unhappiness is a system of maladjustment. Man's freedom is restricted. It is not freedom from conditions, but it is freedom to take a stand towards the condition. Now, this guy has just been sentenced with 65 years in federal prison, and he's not only just innocent, he's one of the finest people you've ever met. And this is what he's talking about. This is what he's writing to me. And of course, I'm receiving this, and I'm in tears. Then he writes about his daughter, Sanabit, who was very ill. And he says, I know Sanabit might not be able to make it till I have the chance to come home. She is rapidly weakening, her lungs function at 24% now. I do not know how much longer she'll be able to wait. Cystic fibrosis and thalassemia beta and diabetes are at work, but so is her fighting power and her resilience. I know one thing though, my years in prison won't go wasted. And then he goes on and on to encourage me, and he says, I'll write you more later, Miko. Enjoy the days under the sun. Surprise your loved ones with an act of love and kindness. Make little things happen in their lives, allowing for bigger things to manifest in them. As always, let love live. Shukri. I'm an Israeli. He's a Palestinian. My background is to a large degree why he is where he is. You know? So it takes some serious greatness. Let me find that one email from her. Here it is. So I went back to Dallas and I met the families. They're all, most of them were living in Dallas. And so I met the families, I met the kids, and I met Sanabit, who was, with an oxygen tank everywhere she went, but she was so enthusiastic. And so he sent me an email she sent to him after she met me. And she goes, Salam Baba. Today all the families met with Miko. He wants to tell our stories, and he is going to do some research and get some contacts in Palestine to interview the people, the hospitals, the schools, the orphanages that receive the aid. It's going to be a big project, but I'm so happy, SOO, This is going to happen, inshallah, 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 inshallah. This is going to be a great project. He mentioned you talked to him yesterday and how excited you were. That is so good. I'm happy you talked to him. Yalla, talk to you tomorrow, inshallah. And then a couple of years later, Shukri wrote to me, he said, Sanabel is on her deathbed fighting for her life. Please keep her in your thoughts. Her mission on earth is about finished. She says she won't go before she can see me. I said, baby, I'll always be with you, no matter when and where you go. May Allah have mercy on all living things. Shukri, and a few days later, he said, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, Sanadu passed on Tuesday, May 14, 2013 at 2 a.m. She went peacefully and gracefully. She will be buried today. And the prison authorities didn't allow him to leave the prison to see her before she died, or of course, go to the funeral. And so this is the kind of person that we put in jail for 65 years. And I'll say something about the trial. As I was reading this, it reminded me. So the way the trial operated was basically they had to go to jail. So what they did was the prosecution had two key witnesses, expert witnesses. And these expert witnesses were active Israeli intelligence officers who came from there and testified anonymously, which is a violation of the constitutional rights of the prisoners. Unprecedented in the history of the United States. The largest body of evidence were documents that were brought. Documents were confiscated by the Israeli military in offices of different Palestinian agencies, and then sent here. Some were translated, some were not translated. Those that were translated badly, and they made up the body of evidence that was used against these guys. And one of the more absurd arguments that were being made was that the Holy Land Foundation had a program for orphans, for Palestinian orphans. And the prosecution said, you see what they're doing when they're helping orphans? They're encouraging suicide bombers, they're encouraging terrorism. Now, the people that were saying this, the witnesses that the prosecution brought in to say these things were not, these were serious people that advise the president, people that work in think tanks here in Washington, D.C. And they were saying, because the logic is this, if you're a Palestinian father, and you know that by committing an act of suicide, your family is going to get a stipend of $50 a month, certainly you'll be encouraged to go and kill yourself, right? And commit an act of terrorism. That was the argument. That was the actual argument that was made. And so what they said was, by supporting the orphans, they were encouraging terrorism. Now, the orphans, it turns out, that they were supporting, and this is the work that the lawyers did. None of them became orphans because their fathers or their parents were killed in anything even remotely. It was all natural causes or accidents. None of the orphans that were listed in their orphan program became orphans as a result of that. What I did, I went the other direction and I took a look to see how many of the actual Palestinians who committed acts of suicide actually had children. And the number, I think, was 1. Because the people who are recruited and who volunteer for this sort of thing are young people that do not have a family. Now, there were very few relatively. I think there were about 190 cases, and they stopped a long time ago. So it's not even anything that was relevant. But just to show the absurdity of the claim and the fact that the court allowed it. The court allowed this. And even though the lawyers objected and so on, it didn't make any difference. So the first trial ended in, like I said, a mistrial. The second trial, everybody was convicted and ended up. And then they went to appeal. And in the appeal, the lawyers showed that the second trial, the second judge allowed pieces of evidence that should not have been allowed. The appellate court didn't care. The Supreme Court wouldn't take the case, obviously. And President Obama, as he was leaving office, was there's a serious international campaign to get these guys out, deport them, anything. And he wouldn't even look at the file. He wouldn't even pick up the phone. So today, two of them, the two that received 15 years, are out. One was deported immediately. No, it was deported immediately. His family came to pick him up, and when they arrived, they were told that he's going to an ICE facility for a year because his naturalization papers were not complete when he went to jail. So he's deported, and he's in Turkey. The other one has been living here, was back in Dallas for a year, can't get a job, can't open a bank account, can't start a business, can't do anything, can't travel. And so he is leaving this country, he's going overseas. The third one, Mufid, who got 20 years, is supposed to be released this year, so I'm waiting to hear. And the last two were 65 years. And even though they all qualified for early release during COVID, humanitarian release, they all qualified and they were all denied. So that's a reality for these guys. That's the story. It's a sad story, but I think it's important to see how even the justice system in this country is heavily influenced by the Israeli lobby.
Well, the story that you shared with us just now is one that's repeated over and over again among members of the African diaspora. And for those of you that do not know, the Israeli Defense Forces are the ones that train the police here in the United States. So the brutality when they killed George Floyd or other serial murders, that's actually coming from Israel, those tactics, right? And so it is not surprising to me. It's a very sad story, and I don't mean to in any way minimize the suffering of these men and their families. But sadly, it's not surprising. I'm sure if we went around the room, we could all tell stories that are similar to this. So, but what I want to come back to, because I really think this is so important, is that it is time for us not to be working in silos. This is the same system. The victims may look a little bit different, but it's coming from the same corrupt, racist, anti-human system. And so, it behooves all of us that care about these issues, whether it's locally in DC, whether it's in Palestine, to really understand that it's really one issue. And, I was having a conversation earlier with somebody today, a young woman, Tunisian. She says, we just need to make sure that the American government knows how bad Israel is. I'm like, it's not going to work because Israel is born of the American government. It's essentially one system. So the most important thing, I believe, is to educate ourselves. Obviously, we can't educate ourselves about everything. But I wanted you, because we were talking about this before, to weigh in on Tanahisa Coates.
Who?
Tanahisa, I was mispronouncing it. Tanahisa Coates.
Well, so I have very little patience on the issue of Palestine. And my expectation is that people who are out there, who are educated, who are active and, minimally active in issues of social justice and so on, would have a good grasp of what is happening in Palestine because it's connected to everything else. And he wrote a book now, and he's on all the talk shows, and he's interviewed, and he's giving interviews about Palestine, which is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I just look at it and I go, did he really only just find out today? It really took him that long to find out? So I come from this there's a genocide going on. There's a heightened,
Urgency.
but I mean, there's a heightened level of the genocide that's been going on for a year. There's been a genocide, the genocide's been going on for 75 years before that, but this last year, I mean, it's really been intense, right? The estimates are that the number of Palestinians killed is exceeding 200,000. And we're not only talking about people being bombed, we're talking about now kids dying from, simple infections because there's no medication. It's horrifying. It's just,
So
and I'm
my-
going, so he just discovered this today?
So my response to Miko was, first of all, the experience of an African-American man, and the propaganda here of how strong it is by the Zionist lobby is such that we're all kind of in our little cubby holes, right, in these silos. So I believe in showing him grace because he's taken has really risked a lot. He has a lot of courage.
Yes.
And I know that you wanted him to do it sooner. I'm just very thankful that he's doing it now because he is on fire. He's going to be speaking tomorrow at Howard. And I know it should have happened sooner, but it happened.
Yeah,
And-
excuse me, but I have to come in here.
Please.
But to me, I think what we have to know is this also. The African American community was on pulse on the Palestinian struggle from the early 60s.
Of course.
You read George Jackson,
Right.
you read his father, Paul Coates, publishing books, Ta-Nehisi's Coates. For me, what's happening now, I think, my explanation is he's functioning, it's good for whatever results. We have to wait and see in terms of how are the young people going to be conscientized by his activity. But what we have to know now is I think the African American struggle has entered a whole class of bourgeoisie
Yes.
where the class, the crust, the upper, especially the upward mobile African American community is scared to death now. Is scared. I have somebody had called me from LA that I respect and said, how should we get at it? Because they're scared of the penalty and they're scared of their livelihood. And so for me, it's going to be a struggle within the African American community, as usual, to sift out this whole situation. But as far as I'm concerned, this class of black people, at this point, having come, and especially the black nationalist movement that felt struggle is becoming like the powerful that we have only understood in whiteface, in
Yes.
white supremacy.
Yes.
That, that goal of becoming powerful like white people
Exactly.
bring this dangerous class mobility
Exactly.
where we are now, even the African American struggle is being compromised. It's not only the Palestinian, the African American working class struggle or homeless struggle, because the homeless has become also a class of their own. And this community is confronted every time they drive their bougie car in whether in Baltimore, San Francisco, LA, etc. They're being faced. And so for me, the struggle within this part is going to be very, very serious. And I see the role, I can appreciate, in fact, a black woman, a very well-known black woman said to me, Ta-Nehisi's situation has been a question for a while. And she said, he's finally coming back home because they're going to place him with us again. He's going to come back to with the rest of us, which is a funny story because, they take you a Goodyear balloon and then they shot that shit down. You are back with your people.
Yep.
So for me, there's this whole thing going on. So I'm with him in the sense of I know my students who are who are actually very concerned about the situation, working in the industry, who are scared. They're saying, what should we do?
Yes.
A very well-known sister called me and said, what should I do? And I said to her, it's your conscience.
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you do this because
Yes.
I don't have the stakes you have, the risk you're going to take. It's in fact a white guy who said to Ta-Nehisi because he has a lot to lose. And we know it is. That's how it is. But then, when he was describing the prisoners, from the time I made the Wilmington 10 on political prisoners of the United States, there are black people still rotting,
Yes.
dying in jail, never going to see. So that this justice stuff you're talking about, it's in the 1970s we made a film on it.
Yes.
And so Rachel McGee, okay, he was the guy with Angela Davis. Angela is off. The guy is still rotting,
Yes.
So a whole class of black people. In fact, Nat King Cole, one of the things he tried to do was free somebody. And that guy died in prison. He couldn't free him. And two governors refused. Jerry Brown Sr., Jerry Brown Baby Bear, refused to commute his sentence. It's a history of untold scale. So I'm saying, I think, the agony of the black bourgeoisie is about to explode. In my view, it might be Oklahoma where it's going to start, but it's about to explode. And I would leave it there. I hope I made a contribution to that.
No, I mean, I think what you're talking about is how sort of upper middle class bourgeoisie or intellectuals or both get co-opted, they get seduced, right? Oh, you're so wonderful. I remember somebody telling me, your parents must be so proud of you. And I knew what that meant. And I said, yeah, my parents think I'm special, but I'm one of millions. So when you believe that, the token, right, and that you're so exalted and you're so wonderful, which feels good, I guess. And then, of course, the minute you say anything that's not part of the larger narrative, then you're, as quickly as you went up, you
Yeah, but the point, my sister, the point I'm making is, he is right. He knew it long time ago.
I understand.
He knew
I
it
understand.
because his circumstances tell us that. His intelligence, he's a very intelligent
Yes.
brother. And I'm glad he's doing what he just did.
Yes.
But I'm saying he knew all along
Well,
this thing.
you're-
He's not a tour guide or
Yeah.
a tourist just
Look, you're in a
discovered.
position to know his history, which I did not, and I very much appreciate
Well, they
it.
were, these are Howard students. 43 years of my life, I've seen this class brewing.
Yes.
But I'm glad he's biting the bullet
Yes.
because I think he can sleep better now,
Well,
in my view.
And also, I mean, for the younger students that you were talking about that just are starting their careers and are understandably worried about how speaking out is going to impact them, I say that those of us that are older, that are established, are the ones that really should be taking these positions because, okay, what, I'm gonna get fired? I mean,
Well, I'm
people-
not sure I think young people are very important. I don't,
No,
because
I didn't
listen,
mean.
my sister Gigi, Dr.
Please.
Gigi, because he has to go to his
Oh, I'm sorry.
fatherhood
Let's open it to
situation.
Q&A.
Yeah, let's open
Yeah,
it.
I think we should go into question and answer
Sure.
because he's gonna run to his children or child?
Children.
Children. Okay, we admire that part. We wanna let him go early, but I think let's open it for discussion
Yeah.
because
Sure.
there's a lot of folks that I know who have something to ask and say.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Comments? Yes, please.
Thank you for sharing your story and also, I'm sure, the courage that it took to kind of formulate your own opinion based on what you grew up in and then what you ended up facing the truth. Not a lot of people take that route, so I'm sure that took a lot of courage. I wanted to ask, is there I think it would be a powerful movie.
It would be a very powerful movie to turn this into a script and make it into a movie, just because, it needs a wider audience and I think a movie would probably be the best way. Is there any thought of doing that?
Can I add something with my sister Shay? That's my friend, so I can join her. Because of what you said, that whole early part of your book is key. Don't, in fact, that's the most powerful part for me because everybody gets hope. They can, we all are human beings at a certain point, agonized, but sometimes even when we deny and do escapist stuff, we read something like that, we say, I could change. For people who are going into a ripeness, it's very important. The whole beginning is powerful. The whole beginning is powerful because because we are also, and especially in the left, we are instant progressive revolutionaries, instant coffee kind of revolutionaries. So when we see human beings like us who started and come from a long journey, we get encouraged and become more committed. And I think a film is very, very important to add to that. I don't know if what you're going to.
Well, it's very interesting. The idea of a script and a film has come up several times. It's never materialized, but we are in the final stages of a documentary that follows the story. We even have actually a little clip out. I thought about it. We could have shown this like a 7-minute clip, kind of like a trailer. But we are in the just really the final stages of a documentary that follows. And what we did with it. The biggest danger when you do something like this is, of course, the white savior, which I was terrifying me the whole time. I said, we have to do everything we can to make sure that this is not the story. So what we did was, this friend of mine who's the movie maker, the producer, followed me, and we spent a lot of time in Palestine together. We went on several visits, and there are several key friends that I've made, but people that have influenced me, Palestinian activists who have influenced me over the years. And we went and we visited them in Palestine, and it was really them talking. So we used kind of my story to highlight them. And then my role was to say, here's where I was born and raised. This is what this thing that you all admire called Israel. Here's the reality that you don't see. And then we see them and they talk. So to me, that's really, that really does the job. So that should be coming out, inshallah, as they say, hopefully this year. But yeah, that is, but a script, there have been ideas, but there's never been a script made, actually.
Thank you.
Can you speak about the political climate there now, today, tomorrow, what happened yesterday?
Well, the political climate there on the side of the oppressor, on the one hand, the day before yesterday, everybody was, dancing in the streets because they killed Nasrallah. So Palestinians, of course, were in deep mourning, as were Lebanese, as were Arabs, and people of conscience everywhere were deep mourning that the leader of Hezbollah was assassinated. And not only he was assassinated, but apparently many hundreds of other people were killed in that bombing. And today, so the Israelis were celebrating, and today they're all, scared to death and sitting in their little safe rooms and little bomb shelters and vowing revenge and vowing that they will go out there and they will pummel the Iranians and they will pummel the Lebanese and they will pummel the Palestinians. They will pummel. It's an atmosphere of such violence, which is not new. It's not new. It's been like that from the very beginning. But there's no voice of reason at all. Any dissent is immediately cut down. And right now, the authorities. I'm talking about the Israeli government, yeah. Now, on the Palestinian side, Palestinians have been living under a reign of terror for almost 8 decades. A reign of terror. Now, the way they did it, the way the apartheid state did it, even though it's a very small country, they separated Palestinians, and the different Palestinian groups are governed by different bureaucracies depending on where they live specifically within the country. So, a guy like me, an Israeli Jew, can live anywhere throughout the country, doesn't matter. You've got light, you've got water, you've got, your kids have playgrounds and good schools, and you have access to healthcare, everything's fine, regardless of where you live. If you're Palestinian, you don't enjoy any of those anywhere, but the particular oppressive rules that apply to you are applied by different bureaucracies depending on where you live. So in some places it's the military. Other places, it's the intelligence services. Other places, it's the police. But the oppression is the same. It's just governed by different groups. So every group has their own problems and has their own bureaucracy. So it's impossible to work together. It's impossible to work together. When I go there, I can travel anywhere I want and meet anywhere I want at any time. It could be a little risky for me, but because I'm a white male, then I have privilege, I can get away with it. They can't. To get a Palestinian, and I don't know if some of you may know the geography, but if I have a Palestinian friend in Hebron, and we want to go meet somebody in Jerusalem, it's impossible. Unless, now I can take the Palestinian from Hebron in my car, but if we get caught, he goes to jail. I get a slap on the wrist because I took a Palestinian in my car somewhere where he's not supposed to go. But, I'll get away with it. He's going to go to jail. Now, the level of the tightened security in terms of the intelligence agencies, you can't talk freely anywhere if you're Palestinian. You can't text. You can't post. Now, this was always the case. The fear, the intense fear of imprisonment of you and your child, the demolishing of your home and so on, exists all the time. Since October 7, it is 1,000 times more harsh, beyond belief. Everything from the fear of posting, sharing, texting, talking to anyone, all the way to the conditions in the apartheid prisons. The apartheid prisons have always been horrific. Torture is not even something that's discussed. It goes without saying. People don't even mention torture because it goes without saying that you're going to get beaten and tortured and denied sleep and food and water. I mean, it goes without. But there was a semblance of order. I've had several friends who were arrested after October 7 and released after 6 months, 8 months, whatever the case may be. I have friends whose children were arrested. And when they came out, and by the way, these are all what's called administrative detention, so there's no trial. There's no charges. You see these people after coming out. One of them described it as the prisons have become cemeteries for the living. And another friend of mine said the crazy has hit these people in a way that's the jinn. He said the majunin. The crazy has sunk into them in a way that was never seen before. And when I look at them as they come out, it's a shadows. Unreal. So the atmosphere on the Palestinian side is of, horror. Just absolute horror. And if we're talking about the Gaza Strip, and we should be talking about the Gaza Strip too, I feel that the right thing to do is to liberate the Gaza Strip like they liberated the concentration camps after World War II. The Gaza Strip is not a country, it's a concentration camp. It always was. There's no history to a Gaza Strip. The history to the city of Gaza is as many other cities in Palestine, but not a strip. The strip was something that the Israelis created as a concentration camp in the early 1950s. That has to be liberated, and these people have to be set free, along with everybody else. But the intensity of the last year in the Gaza Strip makes it, so that the mood is on that side is, I don't know that there's a word to describe it other than what it must have been, when the killing machines in Europe and the Nazi killing machines were at full blast. That's the mood. That's the atmosphere.
If I could add. So settlers are going shopping for beachfront property. They're actually choosing specific houses and specific families to evacuate. Actually here, I believe that they were putting things on sale.
Please, any other questions? Let's. Yeah, go ahead in the back.
Thank you. Hello there. I'm a cultural heritage student, mainly specialized in archaeology, but I was really Thanks for the lecture. I was just really interested in you as a former Zionist indoctrinated Israeli, it's a big hurdle and a lot of activist struggles is just getting over people's uh, liberal Zionism or they're progressives until the point of Palestine, and there's some cognitive dissonance there. What do you I don't know, what's some thoughts you have on some good ways to kind of break that?
To break liberal Zionism? It's funny, the idea of liberal Zionism, I think only, I don't know that there's any other racist, violent, genocidal ideology that could pretend that there's a liberal side to it.
That itself is a progressive movement.
Or that there's somehow a progressive aspect to it or something. You're either a Zionist or you oppose racism and violence. You can't have it both ways. Yeah, but they're progressive except for Palestine. Well, that's not how it works. There's a great Jewish friend of mine, solid activist, anti-Zionist in San Diego, and when he talks to people, he says, I oppose racism. What's your position? Now, when you talk to Zionists, they go, yes, of course, but. There's no but. You either reject racism, fascism, superiority, all that kind of stuff, or you don't. You don't get a pass just because you happen to be Jewish. I'm sorry, or whatever. Christian, doesn't matter, because Zionists come in all different religions. So it's I don't know if it's dissonance or if it's hypocrisy or if it's just willful ignorance, or just they don't want to give up on the racist. On the racism, what a lot of people say to me, Israelis, who think that they're progressive, they'll say, we agree with you. I agree with you 95%, but why do you have to be so extreme? Why do you have to be so extreme? We agree with you 95%. And I always think, so that 5%, damn it, what's that 5%? How do we, the 5% is exactly letting go of being a racist. That's the process. You have to let go of being a racist and see humans as humans, and they don't want to do that. And even, I get interviewed by people, and some of them are very progressive, or they think they're progressive. And I did an interview with Kim Iverson. I don't know if anybody follows her. She's got her podcast. She's very popular. She's very smart. And she was talking about this idea that people are attached to, which is called the two-state solution, that somehow Palestine has to be partitioned. And which I reject completely. I've been rejecting it for for a long time. And she said, yes, but it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to these liberal Israelis to have to live in a place like Saudi Arabia, for example. Because if Palestine was free with equal rights, then of course they're going to be like Saudi Arabia, because Arabs are all Muslims and Muslims are all fanatics, and women are going to have to start wearing that was her conclusion, and she's an intelligent, educated woman. That's where people, I go, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? We're talking about democracy. We're talking about equal rights. We're talking about a free Palestine. That's your concern, that the poor, liberal Israeli oppressors, they will have a problem? That's the issue? Those are the people that we're worried about right now? They're fine, and they're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. But these are things that people latch onto. And the reason they latch onto is because they don't want to give up their sense of supremacy or their affiliation to the supremacy of the Jewish settlers, the Zionist settlers in Palestine. So that's my take on and again, can you imagine everybody say, I'm a liberal fascist? I'm a fascist, but I'm a progressive fascist. I mean, the only people that get away with it are Zionists.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead. No, I just, two things I want to say, and then I want you to take it. One, the role of England in the invention of
Right.
Israel. That's one I'm interested in your addressing it. The second one is, the irrationality of settler psyche is what America is all about, what the United States is about. I see, I've been studying Australia, South Africa, South Africa, Israel, and many even in the Latin American countries where the settler psyche continues to reside from the understanding of a robbed land, which enables them to want to live together with even that. I mean, you could see these segregation, oppressive deportation of Native Americans into the so-called Indian territory is part of that. And so is there this irrationality from a robbed land that I think, is that what's enabling people to have creatures sometimes we don't know how to understand? Because I really don't understand when, for example, an Israeli says that Hamas, the school should be bombed because they teach Israeli hatred. For me, a bomb being dropped on me makes me hate somebody forever. Anybody who killed my father or displaced my mother will be my enemy forever. It creates the devil in me. I just wanted you to elaborate it. The question is muddled, but I hope you're getting me.
Yeah, no, it's not muddled at all. I think to try to understand, I don't think it's possible to understand this because it's impossible to understand this kind of, it's a mental condition. It's not a condition that a healthy mind can understand. It's like you said, you drop a bomb and you kill 500 people. First of all, how can you do that? Well, it's impossible to understand, and you're a doctor, maybe you can help us, but it's impossible to understand if you have a healthy mind. It's impossible to understand that somebody would do this, and so what you have to do is find the source that is creating this reality and eliminate it, dismantle that source, which in our case is the apartheid state, the apartheid education system, the military, and so on. Again, because I don't think curing it or understanding it is possible. You have to remove the source. The England part is very interesting because you see what's interesting is this. The Zionists came up with a crazy idea. The idea was that Jews are a nation, like other nations, and that they have a history book, which is the Bible, and they have a land, which is Palestine. Now, none of these things are true. Jews have never been a nation. Jews have always been a religious minority around the world. That's why you can have a Polish Jew who looks more like me and a Yemeni Jew who's completely, dark skinned. They don't speak the same language. They don't eat the same food. They don't have the same culture, but they have a shared faith. The religious laws they follow are what unites them and nothing else. Now, the greatest rabbis in the Jewish faith over thousands of years have been saying just that. What unites this idea of the people of Israel is their religious laws, nothing else. So there's no such thing as a Jewish nation in the modern term, in the modern sense. The Zionist says no, it is, and we are it. And they meant white European Jews who were secular. Then they said, well, our history book is the Old Testament. And they were saying it to people who read the Bible literally. And so they accepted it. Of course, the Bible is a book of faith that has nothing to do with history. And then they said Palestine is our homeland, and that's not true either. Even according to the Jewish law, the theology, the Jewish people were allowed, the people of Israel were allowed to reside in the Holy Land under an agreement with the Almighty that they follow the Almighty's laws. And where they broke the agreement, they were exiled. This is the religion, this is the theology. And they have never been allowed to return. And according to Jewish law, which is a body of laws that has been established over the last 2,000 years, Jewish people are prohibited from sovereignty in the Holy Land. They're prohibited from mass immigration to the Holy Land by their own laws. Now, if a Jewish person wants to go and live and worship in the Holy Land, that's fine. But they have to follow the laws of the land, and they have to be obedient citizens to whoever has sovereignty in the land. This is Jewish law. This is according to the letter of the law, again, of this body of laws that has been created over the last 2,000 years. Now, the Zionists were very intelligent. They were secular. My grandparents, this is the generation of my grandparents, the early Zionists, they shaved their beards, they looked white, they spoke all the European languages. They were doctors and physicists and philosophers and writers. And so the leaders of, early 20th century Europe looked at these people and they said, we can talk to these people. Look at them. They don't look like Jews. They don't act like Jews. They're like us. And so why not let them go to this land of, brown barbarians and let them settle there? Let them colonize. Why not? So basically the British, and there's this famous thing called the Balfour Declaration, where the foreign minister of the United Kingdom wrote a note to this Jewish millionaire by the name of Rothschild, giving them the right to establish a Jewish homeland in somebody else's country. So one white racist European giving another white racist European somebody else's country to establish a homeland. But that's how things were done in those days. Now, they never imagined, and they didn't want the religious Jews that looked like Jews. The Zionists didn't want them. They hated them. If you read what the Zionists wrote about Jews as religious people, you would think Hitler wrote this. It's horrifying how much they hated them. They certainly didn't want the Jews coming from Arab countries because they were just as primitive. They were Arabs. They didn't want them. They wanted a European colony for themselves in this country called Palestine. So the British enabled it, of course, because they could talk to these people. Why not? These were their people. And that's how, and they enabled it and supported it, of course, in many, many ways, until eventually they occupied Palestine for a while, and eventually they left, and they let the Zionists do what the Zionists do best, which is kill and steal. And then somebody was asking, it was in this movie that we were watching this movie a few days ago, and there was a conversation after the movie. And in this movie, they were saying that they were showing these Jewish settlers, these Israeli settlers, and some of them looked like religious Jews. So the assumption is that they are following their faith. And in the movie, the narrator was even saying they're completely religious, they follow all 10 commandments. And I thought, what are you talking about? The 10 commandments, remember something about no stealing, no murdering? What do you mean they follow all 10 commandments? They are in complete violation of Jewish law. Even though they wear the beards and they cover their heads and pretend to be religious Jews, they're not, they're criminals. But according to Jewish law, they're criminals, not just according to, other laws. And so they're thieves, they're murderers, they're racists. But the Europeans and then the Americans didn't mind because they looked like them.
I think that, your stories are so important because you are Jewish. I guess you would be considered a self-hating Jew. It's very hard as somebody who is not Jewish to speak out because you'll be attacked with anti-Semitism. However, I just would remind people that, any other liberation movements, there was always, people having to speak out against injustice. I think when you're asking Professor Kadima about what is that mindset, it's entitlement. It's actually seeing that you are superior and you are better than. And people don't give up that right. I mean, the Afrikaners, for example, it's not like they said, okay, Mandela and the ANC, what you're doing is good. So, to the gentleman that sort of asked the question about, that psychological dissonance, I would say that the hypocrisy is multifold. One of the things that I'm very heartened by are young Jewish kids. The number of kids that are rejecting the birthright trips when they go to West Bank and really see for themselves. They don't have as much of the indoctrination, or I shouldn't say indoctrination because the Holocaust was real, to say, because we went through this, we can, this is our right. I think that, immediately when you start to speak out against the Israeli government, you're a Holocaust denier, you're anti-Semitic, and so I think it's important not to fall into that rabbit hole. And that's tough, right? Especially when you're under attack. I mean, as soon as, I remember Piers Morgan was interviewing somebody, do you support Hamas? And, the person is trying to answer, well, there's no reason to answer him. I mean, I have these fantasies, how I would answer him. I said, just because you have a British accent doesn't mean that you're superior, okay? But I think that it is very challenging, for the young man that's in the back there. It's not easy, but I think we can learn from people who have been in this struggle for a longer period of time, such as Professor Garima, such as other people that are here. So
I have another question before we finish. Okay, I'll submit to that, since I've already spoken.
Can you give the follow-up to what's going on with the 2 prisoners that are left?
You mean the Holy Land Foundation?
Correct, exactly.
Yeah.
So, the system here, and again, for people who don't come from privilege, this is not news, but the system is not meant to rehabilitate, of course, it's meant to punish. And if you're in for 65 years, the punishment is not just that you're in for 65 years, the punishment is every single day. So for example, so Shukri and I have become, very good friends, and I visited him and so on. So they took me off his visitors list as punishment for something, we don't even know why. Hassan, I met his wife recently at a conference. She said she saw him 4 times in 4 years. So when they come to visit, going to visit an inmate who, the whole family has to fly, and then you have to get a hotel, and then you have to wait, and then you go to the prison, and often they'll say it's a lockdown, or you can't see the prisoner, or they look at the way they're dressed, because all of the daughters and the wives are covered, wear hijab. They search them and they find something and they say, no, you can't come in, we found drugs. To find drugs on these people, it's not even absurd, it's beyond absurd, right? Or we found, the metal detector did something, or, something. So they go all through all that and they can't see them. It's a constant punishment. For no reason, they go into solitary for protection. There's no explanation. There's no reason. There's no rhyme. There's no explanation, and there's no accountability. I described this when I went. The feeling of being a visitor that I had was like being a little ant or a little bug that the guards could just go, and that's it, and nobody would care. Now, I had the right to leave at the end of the day, or the worst case scenario, I would not go in, not be permitted to enter. It doesn't happen to me. But just the way, the atmosphere and the way you're treated, I can't imagine to be on the inside. I just can't imagine to be on the inside, And so it's ongoing, never ending, just humiliation and torture. That's all there is, and forever they're
So
treated.
there's no case, there's no there's no procedure, there are no cases in play at this point to try and get.
The only thing that can save them is a presidential pardon. And the likelihood of any American president in the foreseeable future pardoning, convicted terrorists is not
So
there.
how did the other three get out?
Well, their terms was over.
Oh, just the terms
Their
over.
terms were over. Their terms were up. So, yeah, their terms were up. So they were released. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Here, I'll give it.
Thank you for sharing your stories. So I used to live in an environment around a lot of conservative Christian nationalists who were also Zionists. And through that, I learned that sometimes the most aggressive and rabid Zionists aren't actually Israelis, and they don't have any affiliation with Israel personally. It's these Christian nationalists that I was around. So I just wanted to know if you had encountered that growing up, these Christians that were very intensely emotionally tied to Israel without having any personal ties there, and what you think of the rise of Christian conservative nationalists in the U.S. and kind of their enmeshment in Israel and in the U.S. in U.S. politics.
Wow.
Very simple question. We're sorry.
So, no, it's a great question. So I never encountered them because, I grew up there. I used to encounter, first time I encountered them like here and there. So for example, the first time I encountered these Christians was actually in Palestine, in Nazareth. The city of Jesus. And they were proselytizing Christians. And they were giving out flyers to get Christians to convert. And I thought, they're Christians. This is Nazareth. What do you mean? They go, no, but they're not real Christians. They need to convert to accept the Lord the way we do. I remember thinking, what? I mean, again, there's no way to understand this. And then somebody that I worked with, I lived in San Diego for a long time, and somebody that I worked very closely with, suddenly was born again. And she went from being this wonderful, real progressive, kind of socialist, somehow influenced by her children. I can't remember the story, but not important. And she became like that. She had no connection to the place. She couldn't find it on a map. But suddenly, Israel, and wow, and the Israelis, and the whole, this whole hocus pocus narrative became her life. And I thought, this is insane. It's like you talk to a person, they seem perfectly normal. And like another head pops out, and they become this weird thing, And their influence and the money. Now, the Israelis think they're a joke. They think they're a joke. These crazy people believing all this nonsense, but hey, they're giving us money and they're supporting us politically. So of course we love them. Why not? Who cares? That they come on trips and whatever. They meet the prime minister and they get all this, But behind their back, everybody laughs at them because they think they're crazy.
I gotta tell you this Bob Simon story.
Bob Simon,
Of 60
reporter?
Minutes. Yes.
60 minutes, yeah.
So the late Bob Simon did a story on exactly this
Right,
many
Christian knowledge.
decades ago. So he was interviewing this woman who's like perfectly coiffed, hair out of place. And so he was saying, you're basically supporting Israel because you believe that will accelerate the second coming. But if Jews don't convert, then they will be wiped out. She says, Bob, that's not what I say. That's what he says.
That's exactly
Yes,
what this
yes,
person I was
yes,
working with
that's what
started
he
saying
said.
to me.
And then they interviewed Israeli government and the exact same thing. We don't care.
Yeah, they support us.
They spend more money to support Israel than the biggest Israeli lobbies do. I think it's horrifying. I think it's incredibly scary because there's no rationale there at all. There's no reasoning there at all. So to me, it's terrifying.
I have a question. Because the word socialism just dropped like a bomb on me. To me, I want you to, if you have this information, the powerhouse of revolution of this 20th century, in my view, not only the Russian Revolution, but its implication is to a lot of the great revolutions all the way to Cuba. The Jewish powerhouse of socialism or socialist revolutionaries. Where is that? Because to me, I'm baffled to see this amazing historical magnitude. And then did it trickle to Israel? Did some of these revolutionaries, or at least their idea, lineagely trickle towards Israel? Is there, like, for me, I'm like, where are this? Because the Jewish intellectuals, even just if we took the Russian Revolution, what they were going through and what they were contributing into this whole intellectual, I would say, revolution, is so enormous. And I'm saying myself, in Israel, are there intellectuals who just know this? Because if they are, because I know this thing wouldn't jive with them. I don't know.
But by and large, the Jewish socialist, communist intellectuals you're talking about did not become Zionists. They rejected Zionism. Now, the Zionists, the early Zionists, my grandparents' generation, by and large, believed they were socialists. They created a socialist welfare state. What they actually were national socialists. That's what they were.
Okay.
They were national socialists because they excluded the Palestinians. So they believed in Jewish labor, in Jewish labor movements, and Jewish unions, and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a welfare state. Education and healthcare and all that kind of stuff for Jews was great. Then, but Arabs were excluded, of course, because the Arabs were just invaders and we didn't want them. So there was not even a conversation about including them. There was a communist party, which was a mixed party, a small communist party that was actually had representation in the House of Representatives, in the Knesset, and they were mostly Palestinians, but it was kind of a mix. But these were the days, so that's another story. But they believed that they were completely socialist. And then what happened was they had another problem, because in the early mid 1950s, suddenly the Jews weren't coming. So the whole idea of a Jewish majority state wasn't happening. The Holocaust survivors didn't go. A small fraction of Holocaust survivors actually went to Palestine and what became Israel. The vast majority didn't go. Out of 2 million that existed in camps after World War II, a fraction went, and many of them left because they couldn't stand it. The wealthy American and European Jews didn't come, and they were kind of caught, with a problem. So then they started a campaign to bring the Arab Jews, the Jews from Arab countries who had never been Zionists, who had nothing to do with Zionism, who were proud Iraqis and proud Egyptians and proud Yemeni, whatever, They didn't want this whole Zionism thing was a European thing. Then they started a campaign which included a great deal of terrorism against the Jewish institutions to scare the Jews to leave. In Iraq and in Egypt and other countries, but that's a whole other story. And then these Jews suddenly came. But these Jews they didn't look like me. They were dark, they were Arabs. So you can't really treat them like you would treat the Europeans, because they're inferior. And they were not shy about this. They said this, publicly. It was written, it was said publicly that these people are inferior, so we don't need to give them the same quality of education. All they need is maybe 5-6 years of school, and then they can go sweep our floors and clean our homes and, do that sort of stuff. Never mind that the Jews that came from these countries were all highly educated people, successful people in their own right, but when they came, they were just Arabs, so they treated them. So suddenly these socialists became even more selective in who was going to enjoy the benefits of the welfare state. So if you look like me, you went to a good school. If you were darker, you went to a slightly less quality education, because you didn't need it. You weren't gonna be successful anyway. And of course, if you're a Palestinian, then nobody cared, about your school. There was no investment at all.
And then
In your
there was another
education.
one, the Ethiopian Jews.
That didn't happen till much later. That happened much later. Then they brought, actually African Jews, and they treated them, of course, like racist street blacks. There's no surprise there. And I remember when I was in, middle school, this word was floating around, integration. And we thought, wow, what is integration? It's a big word. What does it mean? So here's what it meant. I went to a good school, kids who looked like me, white European, kids of white Europeans, right? They brought the kids from the school that was only a couple of blocks away. These are kids whose parents came from, our grandparents came from Arab countries, so they're inferior to us. But then one day, they decided it was time to integrate. Not Palestinians and Israelis, no, forget that, that's out of the question. The Jews who were brown were the Jews who were white. And they brought them to our school and put them in separate classes. That was integration. And still, to this day, the color of your skin determines your success, just like in any racist society. There's no difference there. But the socialism part, they spliced it and sliced it. They gave the privileges. Now it doesn't, the privilege of the welfare state. The whiter you are, the more you could enjoy it, and the more socialist you could be. But they don't need the education, and they don't need that. We don't need to worry about them, that kind of thing. That's the kind of socialism that the Zionists developed. But these other intellectuals, the socialists you're talking about, never became Zionists.
I'm conscious of the time.
And the book signing.
And the book signing, but I also, you have been raising your hand.
No, it's fine, it's
You
fine.
sure?
I'll ask at the book signing, but I'm getting excited.
No, let's
for
hear
it.
it.
I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh.
Thank you.
Now you have to.
Yeah.
Now I'm definitely gonna forget everything I wanted to
Okay.
say. So anti-Zionist Jew. And I had, I think, a very similar transition or awakening, I guess, to you. Mine happened a little more recently. But I was caught off guard by, I have a family that lives in Israel, and then I also have family that lives in other countries, but were raised in like a very, went to Hebrew school and everything. And so I was very caught off guard by the level of the Hasbara that has infected everyone, not just the Jewish community. And this isn't really a question, but just kind of going back to what you were saying before, I think the word indoctrination is important and accurate, because while the Holocaust did happen, those are two, it's been mythologized and weaponized in a way that has become more like indoctrination or propaganda.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your bravery and your transition, because I can imagine that there's a lot of blowback. So I think that's just a beautiful way of ending this session. Thank you. Thank you, Miko.
Sure. Book signing. Book signing right there. They bring the book right there. Whoever wants to buy the book.
You have a little table?
Up there. And then you bring it here.
My mother was an adjunct professor. She taught like a very esoteric economics class.
Excuse me, we're going to
I'm
do
not working right now, but again, I a lot of your story, Elena. A lot of your story fascinated because I feel like I've sort of reached the point where like I can't go back.
To participate with poetry, you can do art show.
That's fine. I'll message you.
We did consistent in opera here. Dr. G.
Oh, yeah.
So you're welcome to
Yeah, so I have some family, I mean, diaspora community, so we're kind of all over the place. But
actually, just
So where do you live?
I live here, I actually live up the street, so this is very convenient. And I was at Star Korea last night.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, I was actually hoping to run into you, yeah, there.
But I left maybe before you came.
I came late, so,
I left around 6:30.
um,
What's everyone else up like?
yeah.
Come back and say hey.
Yes, I definitely will, because, I'm definitely looking to get more involved with things, with my different,
You're gonna find a great area.
I know, and I already, think like Palestinians are so warm and welcoming, like,
So I want to give you some
Excuse
advice.
me.
When it comes to the holidays, you know, they always get really Trump and
oh no, like, I get it, I wasn't disappointed. Come to a very similar realization.
I'm Iranian, Palestinian, Yazidi,
Sorry. It was so nice meeting you.
Not cut her off.
Yeah.
Just invited her from the high holiday, Rosh Hashanah.
I'm thinking I'm gonna hang out with JVP and get to know your friends.
So listen, did you find this interesting? It's not easy, but really, I'm proud of you. Very proud of you. Good luck, okay?
So much. I hope we meet again.
Thank you.
And I just, of course, no, once, there's no other choice, and it is hard to sort of like let go, drop your senses and not to realize that you've been wrong, or, you know, doing something that's horrible or hurtful.
That's why we're still here. That is a very tough transition. Your whole life is say that you are in my safe space without knowing it's different reality.
And I learned also that, my father's Peruvian, but we always say ojalá, which I just found out comes from Troma. Well, and I was wondering, is Saka, Sadaka?
Thank you so much.
So nice to meet you. I'm not very
Oh,
I
yes.
now we go to yeah.
Today's October 1st.
Yeah, that's like the music. I work with at the hospital. That's something I'm very. Well, I'll say nice to meet you. Very encouraging.
I feel encouraged.
Oh, I do.
So on, but it's
What's your, how do I do that? Thank you so much.